So we've had the huge news at Everton this week. The Friedkin takeover has been completed. It's been described as a bargain deal in some quarters. But what have you made of that suggestion, and what are your initial thoughts on the takeover overall?
I think there's some misunderstanding about sort of what they paid. So you have to break down the price they paid for the shares, but also the taking on the debt that's there. So although Mashiri has capitalised 450 million quid of his debt, which effectively means it's, for all intents and purposes, is gone. There is about another 650 of debt around the club through various parties, and that'll all been taken on, in essence, by Friedkin. So they paid around about 700 million pounds for the club in its entirety, and then on top of that, you've got the money that they're going to have to put in for running costs and really just to get it up to a sort of minimum level. I think, unfortunately, what tends to happen in situations like this is that in that period, because Everton have been so sort of restrained in their ability to spend money for that's about 2 years, really. There's likely to have been quite a bit of spending that's not been undertaken that now needs to be undertaken. So I would expect them to have to spend some money. So look, I think if you look at the essential spend of 700 plus maybe 100 million on top for the running costs over the next year or so, you're talking about a deal 700-800 million, which I think is an okay deal, but it's not the bargain that's been sort of talked about. 40 million is really almost irrelevant in the context of what they paid. But clearly, if they can turn it into one of England's major clubs, they are going to have an asset on their hands that's worth double or more, particularly if the game grows in the way particularly American investors believe it will. So I think overall it's exciting times for Everton, and that really is where the focus should be. I would say less on what they've paid in terms of what a great deal Friedkin have done, but more about what it means for Everton. I think it's a fabulous development for the club. They've got a proper owner that has good understanding of the game generally, has made mistakes at Roma, and therefore will be in a position to fix some of those things that they've got wrong before. So I think it's very positive.
In terms of the Friedkin group, they're expected to increase their shareholding to 99.5%. What is the significance of that for Everton and the previous or existing shareholders?
Well, I think they've already done it. So they passed the resolutions by what's known as a written resolution. So they are at 99.5% already. So, I mean, the relevance is limited, really. I mean, at the end of the day, Friedkin own the club. There's now 7,000 shares out of something like 1.5 million that they don't own. Those will be swept up by, I would think, what's known as a Section 90 squeeze out, whereby they can compulsorily acquire those shares over the next few months through a legal process, which will give them 100%. I mean, they may keep them in place, but if you've got, I think there's something like 2,000 individual shareholders, and there's just a cost to keeping that running. You've got something, you have to send them an annual report accounts, you have to invite them to an annual general meeting, all of these things that they don't want to do, really, if they can avoid it. Not really so much because they don't want to communicate with the fans, but just because it's just costly, and it impacts the flexibility that they may ordinarily want. So I would think they'll go to 100%. But in essence, the deal is done. I mean, when you own 99.5% of something, you own it, so it's they're already there. So that's, again, I think it's all good news. Everton fans might not like the fact that they're sweeping out those minorities. Certainly not if you bought the shares at a high price. But the reality is actually it's good news. You want them to be able to have the operational power to be able to take whatever actions that they want without having to to go back to shareholders. But they're way over that, because you're over that situation when you're over 75%. But you just don't want to have to worry about minorities when they've got the situation that they've got on their hands now, which is going to involve a huge amount of spending by the Friedkins and a whole load of action. So again, I think it's good for Everton as in terms of Everton fans and Everton's football club. I think it's good that they're going to have 100% ownership.
And I've seen fans talking about they're now debt-free as a club, but I mean that isn't quite true, is it? Where does Everton's financial situation and debt situation look at the moment in time after the deal's gone through?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we don't know. So they have removed the charges, the legal charges, the sort of thing you have on a mortgage, and the security from Everton Football Club in the last 24 hours. So from the RMF, Rights and Media Funding security. So that's gone now from the club. So the only one left is the Metro Bank one, which is from memory, I think is the one that the COVID loan, which is effectively a working capital loan. It's only about 13 million quid. So they're sort of well placed in that respect. But what we don't know is how it's going to be structured above. So, as I said, the Friedkins have taken on about £650 million of debt. So we just don't know where that is, so, and how that will be structured. It may well be in the parent company. I think it's called Roundhouse Capital. We don't know yet. We haven't seen all the filings. And then, of course, we've got to wait for the accounts. So let's just wait and see. I mean, in essence, again, Everton should be relatively relaxed, because I think these guys understand that they're quite limited in what they can do in respect to PSR if they've got a load of third-party debt on the club itself. Because as we know, even if it's shareholder loan now, it's got to be charged at a commercial rate. So you're talking about probably commercial rate is over 10%. So ordinarily, that 650 million quid would be 65 million pounds a year on the PSR calculation. And so, the Friedkins know that they've got to do something with that. They can't deal with that sort of debt on there. So they'll probably have it hived off into some other part of their empire and put the money into Everton, presumably in the form of equity, which again is easier because they'll be 100% shareholder. So if all the money goes in as equity within Everton Football Club and there's no debt actually on the football club, then from a PSR perspective, that's going to put them in a much better position.